okay, if building relationships is the thing that I really care about, then I should double down on that. And that's what led me to recruiting.
This is Unlawful. Welcome to Unlawful. With me today is Khurram Naik. Afternoon, Khurram. How are you doing?
Great, Brandon. How you doing?
So, Khurram, what I really want to know from you is, why don't you tell me what you do and how you got to where you are now?
I'm a legal recruiter. I've launched my own agency. And before that, I practiced in big law as a patent litigator. So that's the path of what I did.
What do you do as a legal recruiter? I know we all get cold calls or we make relationships with recruiters, but what do you view as your kind of day-to-day as a legal recruiter?
I think the core competency of a recruiter is thinking in terms of operations. I think you have to think about firms have needs, lawyers have places they want to go, and you're trying to match the two of them. So you're really just trying to maintain this combinatoric of, which lawyers do I know are a good fit for which roles, and conversely, which firms could be looking for which lawyers. So I think my focus is really on my network. So I'm always thinking about, how do I increase the value of my network for my network? And in doing so, that will create opportunities for lawyers to seek me out or law firms who want to partner with me to make searches. But then other than that, I think related to that, there's the two ways to approach the recruiting business, which is the top-down approach of talking to law firms or companies and saying, hey, what are your needs? And then looking for lawyers that are fit for that. Or on the other end, a bottom-up approach is, I know lawyers, which lawyers are trying to make which moves, and then helping them with those moves. And I think most recruiters are trying to balance between those two. So I think, like many recruiters, that's what I'm working on too, is helping both ends of that marketplace.
How did you do that? How did you go from being a big law litigator, which is something that's very different from being a recruiter? It's not like you changed law firms, right? You took on a whole new profession, really. How did you, first of all, how did you decide to do it? And then how did you execute it?
So it was actually a very unintentional path to become a recruiter. Like many lawyers, of course, I received lots of messages from recruiters and developed relationships with a few of them, had conversation with them. I made one lateral move, and I made that on my own through relationships I made in practice I was a part of a joint defense group, and I got to know some lawyers there, and my skills in the firm were a good fit. So with recruiting, it was something that I was aware of, but never really had any particular interest in it. I was pretty focused on the practice of law, but I was always very interested in the relationships. When I went to law school, I attended on a full merit scholarship to a non-target school in a big city, Chicago. And that mix was appealing for me because I thought de-risked entering the practice of law. And it was a bet on myself to figure out how to use my network to get the role that I wanted. Sure. And so the network was always something that I was very focused on. That is the way that I got into breaking into big law and do that in patent litigation. And the patent bar in Chicago was very strong, very active, very collegial. And so I think that really impressed upon me. I think I was very fortunate to have that early need to use my network, and then in an environment that really facilitated that, the Chicago bar, and specifically the patent bar. So that just forever impressed upon me the importance of my network. As I said, my one lateral move came from my network. So that all set the conditions for where I was heading, really, before I even realized it. And it really was when the pandemic hit that it was just a perfect storm of a lot of things happening. But among other things, the South Asian Bar Association, the conference was canceled, and I was really active in the South Asian Bar Association. It's a whole bunch of people that get together nationally and cities around the country. And that's something that was always very meaningful to me, even if I didn't necessarily, I couldn't point you to some professional outcome I got from any of these conferences.
Sure.
But then when I was canceled in the pandemic, I said, hey, I got to do something that's going to replicate that for me, because that's meaningful to me and probably to other people too. So I put together an email for a bunch of people that I knew, and I said, hey, I know law students getting clouded right now. It's a really volatile market. If you've got a role for a law student, let me know. I'll put it in this email and I'll circulate it, and it'll spread the word. And
this was while you were still a practicing lawyer.
Yeah. So that was just 3 years ago. The exit from big law coincided with me investing in my network. The connection wasn't obvious or apparent immediately, but then I started exploring and said, okay, if building relationships is the thing that I really care about, then I should double down on that. And that's what led me to recruiting.
It's funny because when you talk to litigators about changing, whether it's changing path, going in-house, or changing profession or anything, I think there's a part of them that is looking forward to not having to be confrontational and fight with people all the time. And there's a part of them who think that they're going to miss it, right? Did Did you have any of that concern?
Yeah, I did have a concern, not so much substance work, but to be honest, all the trappings of it. So the income, the certainty of the income, the status, and just signaling that you knew what you're doing. That was my dream firm. It was my dream come true to go to that firm. I thought I had the best IP litigation practice in the country, certainly for what I was doing. And I couldn't have wanted for a better outcome.
So Khurram, tell us, what's your unlawful moment?
Really, it was launching that newsletter because it really was a game changer.
I was hoping that it would be. It's funny because there are some people who I've talked to who I'm like, you know what, I'm going to give you your unlawful moment. And I really do want to dig into it. What happened there? Like, it was really personal to you. And how did that happen and how did you grow it?
It was, I think I've been paying attention a lot in the world of solopreneurship and a lot more about audience building and in the role of media and growing a business. And so there's this concept of these like audience first businesses where first you help people, you get attention for helping people, you build an audience, and then from there you can sell things that are helpful to that audience. You figure out that they tell you what's helpful to them, you share, you find out what's helpful to them, and then you give them what's helpful to them. And that's kind of a playbook that you see a lot in the solopreneur techie kind of space. And so I think I was paying attention to that and saying, okay, that's probably applicable for lawyers too. Lawyers are a little more conservative and less into that sort of culture. Frankly, I think our training is very zero sum. Our law school training is rank. We're used to a very zero sum mindset. And so I think that the notion of I give you attention and I get something back is a trade that people aren't really very comfortable with, even still. I think more so now than ever, but still uncomfortable. So I think that felt edgy and unusual for me to be doing this thing. I think another thing is, as lawyers, we're very deferential to institutions. And so bar associations are an institution. We assume that's the way for lawyers to relate to each other. That's the mechanism by which lawyers will connect and learn from each other. And I just really don't see why that has to be the case. I mean, I think bar associations are wonderful. I'm still active in that South Asian Bar Association I mentioned. But just bar associations, they necessarily cater to the sponsors and interests that support them. Bar associations typically have turnover of no more than 2 years of leadership. And so there's not this continuity and this focus that you can get from having your own organization of some kind. So I think I think that's what's unlawful about it, was that it was not sanctioned in some way.
So what's the status of the newsletter now, and can people get involved in it? How do people access it or get involved with you or get involved in any way?
So the newsletter is called Pani Cooler, and Pani means water in Hindi and Urdu. So it's a water cooler.
I say water cooler conversations all the time in my office, and nobody knows what the hell I'm talking about.
Yeah, I guess we don't have as many water coolers in the office anymore.
You're bringing it back. I love it.
That's right. The newsletter is hosted on Substack, so it's publicly available. You can just Google Pani, Pani Cooler, and you'll find it. And maybe there's some ideas or inspirations for you if you end up running your own newsletter. Really, what even led me to the path of having a newsletter to begin with is I just started sharing my story on LinkedIn in the pandemic. I'm cooped up and I'm looking to connect with people. And this is this great free way to just broadcast your ideas to thousands of people.
Yep.
And so I just started sharing more and more my story. And I was, just like every other big law lawyer, very hesitant to share things about myself, to get personal. But I discovered that the more I was willing to be vulnerable and not just letting it all hang out, having some insight that I'm sharing as well, that intersection between the vulnerability and insight, that I was being helpful to people. And then that resonated with people. And then people were able to deeper connect with me. I would be able to have a conversation with a friend and they'll say, oh yeah, I know you did this thing because I saw your post on it. So I don't have to catch my friend up on all these things because I'm passively doing that. So
what's interesting about LinkedIn is more often than not, and this is true about social media too, is you very rarely get the story. You get right now we're getting hey, I was just named one of the 5 best law dragon monster lawyers or whatever. And you get that, but that's not a story. That's just a result. I don't think that has any staying power at all. It's the story that makes that matter. And I think that's what people like yourself, by having these connections and hopefully Unlawful, will do for people, is it will show them you know what? It's great that you got a great result or something, but what got you there, right? And it's those stories that I'm hoping to proliferate and that I'm hoping will take hold. I really appreciate it. And I hope that we stay in touch, and that's Unlawful.